Welcome back to another episode of Right Here in Mass. Joining me today is Chris O'Brien, the founder and CEO of Dative, a web company that helps architects and custom builders transform their websites from a simple portfolio into a powerful sales and marketing tool. With over 15 plus years of experience in the digital world, Chris merges his construction industry roots to develop award-winning websites and marketing campaigns. Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be
It,
here.
yeah, I'm happy to have you here. I know I just shared with our listeners a brief overview of yourself and what you do, but I'd love to start off there by having you introduce yourself and talk more about your company.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so you summed up pretty well, and I've been doing websites for quite a long time, longer than I probably want to admit. But uh, I over the years I've run data for it's coming up on 13 years. Um, we started realizing there was like kind of that niche of like builders and architects, which we really had a lot of success with. It resonated well with me. My father was a builder, so I kind of grew up in the industry and had understood their marketing challenges, their customer segment, things like that. So um, I know a ton of web people. I'm sure you probably know a ton of web people as well. So it helped us differentiate ourselves from just another web shop to, well, we're a web shop who specializes in this market. And so it was kind of a journey for us. We've only really focused on that. We did a lot of that client type stuff, but we never really focused on that in our own messaging and marketing. So about
Mhm.
2 years ago, and it was a slow position from changing our own website to the conferences we would start to attend and the organizations we joined to be part of. But it's worked out really well, and it's helped us kind of identify our core audience and really do the best work that we're capable of and help them achieve success for what they're looking to do.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up, the whole idea of niching down, because I feel like that's something a lot of service-based business owners end up thinking about a lot. And it's always a question of to niche or not to niche. And so I'm curious to hear like what I guess nudged you to do that. I know you mentioned your dad was a builder, but I'm curious to hear like what made you go in that direction and really go all in on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Like, I mean, I try to read every, business consulting book and blogs and marketing strategy, and it's always like niche down, find your target thing. And it's so scary. You're like, well, what happens if it's not the right fit? What happens if all my other clients dry up? So it definitely felt like a little bit of a leap of faith. I mean, I feel like the good thing is we had some good case studies and clients in that segment. So we had the proof, kind of social proof, like these are, clients we've worked with that we had success with results. I think the big shift for me was about at that time, about 2.5 years ago. I guess it might be more, almost 3 years ago. I had a partner that I founded Dative with. He had this great opportunity at this huge agency, kind of really focusing on the platform we work on and stuff. So anyway, I ended up buying him out, and it was this really big transition point for me. Like, okay, well, where do I want the direction of this company to be?
Mhm.
What do I want to focus on? Do I want to just try to sell the company altogether? Do I want to bring another partner on? And so it was kind of like these big existential questions of like, what's the business going to go? And I thought, well, now's probably a great time to like, I had, been considering niching down and what that would look like. And so I said, well, here's a great opportunity to do that. So that was really the kind of the culmination. Um, like I said, so I joined like the Home Builders and Remodelers Association here on Cape Cod. I started attending more of those meetings. I changed a lot of our marketing and efforts and focus to that audience. We still get a fair amount of other leads just from referrals and word of mouth that aren't exactly that segment, and we still do that work as well. But I was just recently looking actually at our pipeline, and it's probably 80% of the leads that I'm talking to right now are builders or architects. So it's really paid off in those 2 years, and I think if anyone is kind of on that fence of like, okay, I'm like a cleaning company that I'm wondering, do I focus on these type of markets or whatever that is? It's definitely worth it, So I would say go in, and it does pay off. It may take a little while to get there, and so you can always pivot to it. You may not hit the exact perfect one the first time, but I think it's paid off for me.
Totally. And you mentioned a good point as well that you still get leads from people in other industries and you still work with them in that capacity too. So it's nice that given your like flexibility and control of who you do and don't work with, you can say yes to other opportunities and not just kind of like totally closing that off. Because I feel like that's what a lot of people worry about is just like completely closing off anyone else who they would like to work with that doesn't exactly fit within their ideal clientele or whoever it might be. So I'm glad that you mentioned that there, of course, still are opportunities for people to focus on other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've kind of found is that now that I'm really focused on that vertical, I'm starting to offer other services within that. So now, we've done websites and we do custom design and build websites and manage those. But a lot of times we launch the website and then the client might come to us and say, hey, can you help us with our analytics? Or, do you
Hmm.
do email marketing or some of this other content? Like we want to be updating the website. So I've started to focus on expanding what we offer to those clients in addition to the website. So some kind of tangential services that help, their overall marketing strategy. And so if anything, I found I've had even more work in that specific segment. And it's been great because I think I've gotten also some referrals from other even web partners, I know a ton of web agencies that I will refer work to that maybe some specialize in nonprofit or a certain platform like WordPress. I say, hey, I'm not a good fit, but you should talk to these people. And so
Hmm.
it's been really great to kind of build my network because the second you say, okay, like I do X for Y, it helps people solidify, are they a good fit? And when I'm talking to a lead, and just, I think saved everyone a lot of time and effort that, we can identify, is this going to be a good fit for both of us, both for the client and myself early on. And if not, how can I help you find that good fit? Is it a recommendation? Is it, a referral, whatever that looks like?
I love that you mentioned that about like being able to have like referrals, recommendations of other people you can send. I feel like that's one of my favorite things about being in the marketing industry is that everyone is so collaborative and like always thinking about how they can support one another. And it's a great point. I mean, you might get a potential client that comes your way that isn't a good fit for you, but you totally have the right person to send that potential client to.
Absolutely. And I think, even today I was talking with a client earlier today. They were looking for a photographer. I'm like, well, what I know photographers that specialize in headshots and specialize in real estate photography or product photography. So even that, like, when other agencies or vendors have a specialty, it helps me also refer people to them.
Hmm. Definitely. And one thing I'm curious to hear more about, if you're open to talking about this, but you mentioned like buying out your business partner. And I think that's such an interesting subject for anyone who's listening who might be considering that further down the line if they have a co-founder. And so if you're comfortable just talking about it, I'd love to hear what that process was like and how things have been a really positive outcome for you since.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a big change that we had worked together at another agency prior to starting Dative, at a larger agency, and that agency was getting acquired. And so I'm a design background, a user experience and user interface design. So I would had freelance previously and definitely more on the project management design side of things. He was a
Mhm.
developer, loved writing code, didn't, put on the headphones and just kind of sit behind a computer all day. So our skills really paired well nicely. And I was like, well, what if we tried to make a go of our own? And we started this company about, like I said, 12, 13 years ago. And so it was a um, good mix of skills and kind of our approach. And, we were able to really do a lot of work. I was able to design stuff that I knew I would probably never be able to build otherwise, that he could pretty much develop and integrate and whatever. And he didn't really want to do much of the client relation stuff. So I own kind of that part of the business. So it worked really well for quite a number of years. The opportunity came up for him to get this just incredible job being a full-time developer at a really large agency in New York. So it was sort of like, okay, well, what is this going to look like for the rest of the business? Do I bring in another full-time developer? Do I bring in a partner? So it was a lot of like, okay, trying to figure out what that was going to look like and what I wanted it to look like. Do I want to try to just sell the business completely and get a job myself? I was always like, I live in the Cape, so it's like if I can avoid getting a real job and having to commute to Boston every
Yeah.
day, how long can I make that work? I'm still going strong, so that's good. But yeah, so there was, a lot of talk of like, well, money wise, how does this work? Is it,
Yeah.
based on revenue? Is it based on, income? Is it based on the valuation of the business? Fortunately, we were able to find a number that like worked for all of us. Like he was happy with what he was going to get. I could pay him without having to, mortgage every possible thing that I had to do to keep the business running. So it worked out really well for both of us.
Hmm.
I think the thing that I've noticed the most is it's sort of streamlined and I did not end up bringing another partner on, so I'm just the sole owner at this point. It's streamlined and sort of a lot of the decision making process because what might be like a hey, let's have this conversation and we kick it around and have a different point of view and spend days or weeks or months like kind of debating over a decision.
Hmm.
I kind of like trust my gut and I kind of just will make the decision move forward. So it's been helpful, especially now that we've kind of focused on that niche of like, this is what we're going to be doing as a company. So I think it's streamlined some of that. It's streamlined and I simplified it just, I think, operationally wise of like how does this run from that standpoint. So it's been, it's been a little interesting shift. When I was first starting the business, I got a lot of feedback. Some people were like, "Oh, you don't want to have a partner; it's a nightmare. There's no the only all the sayings like every partnership is a sinking ship or whatever, that type of stuff." And I know other companies that have partners and they've been successful for years. So I think it really depends on who those are. But it was a bit of a shift. I'm glad now that we're through it, that it happened. I think the other thing that probably gets glazed over is the amount of just sheer like resetting passwords and account access and like,
Yeah.
oh, I have licenses for this software that I need to remember to change and cancel and take him off of it, all that sort of stuff. A lot of just like that like death of a thousand paper cuts. There's a whole bunch of that stuff that like, oh, I forgot to do that or change the mailing address for these type of things. So there's a lot of that goes into it. But fortunately, at this point we're through all that and it's been, a pretty good transition.
Absolutely. And like you shared, it was a really good opportunity for you to think about where exactly do I want to take Dative now? Like, what does my next decade or so look like within this company? And it gave you that flexibility to do things the way that you wanted to do them compared to previously probably having to run them by your partner and kind of both come to an agreement from there.
Right. And, a lot of stuff we saw the same eye to eye on. And there was some stuff, whether it was a type of client we wanted to go on or a project that we would say yes or no to, that, could get fairly contentious. And it was,
Yeah.
we would always end up coming to a resolution, but it just added to that logistic and overhead of like not only making the decision, but like talking through that. And I think, maybe sometimes I lack that a little bit. I like having that sounding board. So, like I said, I do know other web agencies and people in the industry. I'm sure you do. And I have like kind of a peer group that I will bounce ideas off of because I think it is still good something having that outside perspective
Mhm.
when you do want to have that and value it. Besides just asking my wife at dinner time, she's like, "I don't want to hear about this anymore."
Yeah, I totally get that. And I'm curious to hear what your team structure looks like now that you don't have a partner anymore. So have you brought in other people that are full time or even another partner you might have mentioned, or I'm curious to hear what that looks like.
Yeah, so I do have a full-time developer. We had actually brought him in about a year or two before the restructuring as sort of
Mhm.
like a junior developer. So that worked out really well because he kind of got up to speed on our workflow, our process, our deployment strategy, how we approach projects and structure them, and kind of all the different toolings that we use. So it was a smooth transition in that standpoint where he sort of just took over that lead developer role. He's not a partner, he's just kind of a full-time employee. I think if we didn't have that, it probably would have been a little tougher of like now trying to
Mhm.
find a developer role who fit within the kind of the corporate culture, who fit within our market, and we could afford to pay and all that. I've tried to, um, you know, there's so many ways to outsource stuff here and there, but I try to, for the most part, do everything as much as we can in house because I just feel like projects run more smoother that way. You
Mhm.
know who you're working with. That being said, there's stuff that we don't do like photography or videography. We do have a few kind of preferred partners that we try to work with most often for that same reason. We work together well. We know how each other works. We have kind of a similar approach to the project and client relations, things like that. So, kind of have our little core group of freelancers or other partners that we bring in based on what the project needs.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm curious to hear because having a husband and also a father-in-law who are in the trades, they're both plumbers, and are self-employed. I'm always hearing from them like, "Oh, we're too busy. We don't need any marketing at all," and that makes me die inside. And so I'm curious to hear if you
Yeah.
often hear that from the builders that you work with and the architects, if there's any pushback where they're like, "We're too busy. We don't need any more business, so we're not going to do anything online." And if you
Yeah.
do hear that from people, like what your take on that is.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I hear it all the time. Yep, and it's like, oh, we don't need a website. We're too busy as it is. I think one of the things I always say, and the statistic I said is, well, I think over 88% of people, do research online before making a purchase.
Mhm.
So I say, even if you are getting referred to from some house that you just built, the first thing they're probably going to do is Google you and try to check you out online. And so
Mhm.
if they can't find anything, or if they see something where the pictures are 8 years old and your About Us team has people that don't even work there anymore, they're going to maybe not have as much confidence in hiring you as a builder or as an architect as if that looked up to date and professional. And I think the other big piece is sometimes builders will come to us or come to me and say, like, I know I have a website, but it's not attracting the right type of clients. So we're busy, but we're not with the
Yeah.
type of work we want to be getting. And so a lot of times it's because, there's not great photography. It's like iPhone photos, and the content's just not really very value oriented. So that's a big thing that we help them do is like, let's rebrand and reposition your online presence to be more upmarket and the type of ideal client that you're wanting to work with. So that,
Hmm.
yeah, you're busy, but it's with the level of clients that you want to be working with, and not just maybe the tire kickers or other, clients that really are what their focus is. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so that's the big focus. And what we've tried to help clients get to the point is like, the old approach is, okay, we launch a website and then we don't touch it for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. And all of a sudden you look and you're like, oh, this is so outdated. And then they go and they start from scratch and they have to like start new. And so our approach is try to be, if it is really old, okay, to have a new design site, but be a little bit more proactive about it. I think that's the big shift
Hmm.
is the clients I see that are most successful with like getting traffic, getting good qualified leads. They're more proactive about putting content on the site and adding good photography, adding articles, their press, things like that, versus ones who just put something up and it's basically like a brochure and it's very reactive and they may get some leads from it, but they may not. Um, and so those are the clients I think that have the most success, the ones that are actually a little bit paying a little bit more attention. I would love when somebody's comes to us and say, well, we want to get more traffic. Like, okay, well, how much traffic are you getting right now? Well, I don't know. We don't have Google, they don't have any Google Analytics installed or anything. It's like, well, it's going to be hard for us to measure if we're getting more traffic because we don't
Yeah.
have a baseline. So, that can be a little bit of an educational process of just getting them up to speed so that we can even track and start to see, are we being successful with some of these efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point that you mentioned about like being able to have an updated website that can really attract the right type of clientele that they're looking to have and being able to show the types of projects on their website that they want to get more of. And that's a really good tip there, not only just for builders, but really for anyone in business who is really finding that they're not getting the ideal clients or customers that they hope. It's good practice to just look at your website and be like, is this actually speaking to the person that I'd like to be doing business with?
Right. And I think, it's most businesses, it's easy, or, you kind of don't see the forest for the trees. Your website, you
Mhm.
never probably even look at it from that outside perspective. And a lot of times, if I'm talking with somebody, I'll kind of come to the table at that first conversation, like, hey, coming to your site, not knowing who you are, we are, this is some of the impressions. And they're like, oh, wow, I didn't really
Mhm.
realize it came across that way because, they're so busy looking at it from their point of view that they don't necessarily consider it from a potential customer or a lead or even an employee. A lot of clients we work with are like, well, we have plenty of business, but we have a really hard time hiring and keeping good employees and attracting talent. So the focus of the website isn't necessarily getting business; it's getting higher level staff to come up. And so building out the career section and the corporate culture is actually one of the main goals of the site.
Yeah, that's a great point too, especially, I mean, you probably see this data all the time, but I mean, there's data out there that says how the trades are like struggling to get more people into them within jobs and whatnot. So that's a great point there. Like if a company is looking to hire younger people to work for them, I mean, making sure that they have that recruiting focus on their website is huge.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think those are especially the people who are going to do their research online first, really have that
Hmm.
opportunity to look around. And I think, the website is the first touch point for a lot of potential interactions, whether it's customers, it's employees, it's vendors. We have some builders that are like, we're trying to go after architects, and they say we can't show our potential clients your website because it's so bad. Like you need to look like you'll be able to build the type of house we're designing, and
Yeah.
the homeowners are going to end up looking at it. So even just builders who aren't necessarily looking for projects from the end homeowners, they just want our architectural partners, need to know, kind of step up their game. So yeah, I do hear that a lot, and it's kind of that educational aspect of like explaining to them why it's important, and it's important to market when you're busy. We've had some leads that we've talked with and didn't want to move forward, and all of a sudden like a year go by and they're like, hey, we just, we had some projects scheduled that fell through, so now we're scrambling, can we do the website? And I said, sure, we can jump in, but it might
Hmm.
take us a few months. And you don't want to be in that position where suddenly you're like reactively trying to hurry up and generate a website to get some leads. You want to have be a little bit more strategic about it.
You were spot on with that. I mean, because especially the time that we're recording this is August. So that is a busy season for a lot of these builders and whatnot. But like you said, you want to keep marketing when you're busy. So that way, when slower seasons happen or the leads dry up or projects get finished or fall through, like that you have those leads to fall back on and you're not like, oh my gosh, I totally neglected my marketing and sales for the past few months. And now I'm kind of like totally dry and stuck on what to do.
Right, right. Yeah, it's everything, as you know, with marketing, there's a kind of that lag time of like, even if you're putting that content out now, it might take a month or two or three for it to show up in search results or for people to see your brand enough to want to reach out to you. So, you don't want to be scrambling to try to get some of that content.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm curious to hear what your career history is. I know that you've owned Dative for, I think you said, is it 13 years at this point?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear like what inspired you to start the company. I know you mentioned your dad is a builder, but what kind of led you to this point to becoming an entrepreneur and doing your own thing?
Yeah. So I spent about 10 years working at a sign company.
Mhm.
I graduated in the Cape here in Falmouth and was always interested in art. I was like the Art Honor Society and design and that type of stuff. And I went to UMass Amherst for like a semester, decided college just like, was not for me, and was working at high school part-time at a sign company. I came back and I kept working there. And I worked there for almost 10 years, worked until I was basically managing that business. And there we actually also worked with a lot of trades people,
Mhm.
contractors that needed truck lettering or signs for their businesses, job site signs, or for the business themselves. So at that point, similarly, kind of the seeds for Dative and actually where I'm at now, like seeing these builders, contractors, construction firms, architecture firms, and kind of their marketing needs from a sign standpoint, but then also like a branding standpoint. Sometimes they come to us and they say, well, we need some truck lettering. It's like, oh, do you have a logo? Well, we don't. No, we don't have that. Okay, well, what you really need is a logo and identity system, so we can put that on your truck. You can put it on your business cards. Maybe if you develop a website, you can have it there. So really seeing that need. So yeah, I worked there for about 10 years and was doing some freelance work of building websites kind of on the side. And then I took a venture out and I started doing freelancing. So I started Chris O'Brien Design at that point. I worked doing freelance design in that capacity, like logo design, website design, things like that, for a few years. And then I got a job doing user experience design for a larger agency. I worked there for a few years and then ended up being the director of user experience there. And then when that agency was being acquired, I kind of decided, well, this is the opportunity. Maybe I go and start to work for myself again. So I think I joke that I've worked for myself for so long. I don't know if I'm employable at this point. It's different beast of working for yourself and running everything and making all the decisions versus showing up. And I do love that collaborative working with together people with people on a project, especially the client. We're super collaborative approach. So like I do everything from the initial sales call through the sales process through the planning, design, development, content. So when we're working with a client, we work really, really closely and very hands on, and I love that approach. But I do think seeing working at a larger agency where I was just kind of one piece and there was a big team, I didn't love some of the aspects of that. So I think at
Mhm.
Dative where I'm able to have more control and be more hands on throughout the whole process is really kind of what I think I excel at.
That's so true. Like not being siloed, but being able to just be a part of everything and see like the holistic picture of it and know what's going on in all those different pieces within their marketing and even like the overall organization. So I think that's a great point there because, of course, then you're able to provide them with better results if you know everything that's going on and not just some tiny sliver.
Right, exactly. And I think maybe it's just my kind of personality, but it's like I'd love to, we started a project and all of a sudden if it's, we can launch that within 2, 3, 4 months. It's great. We get it out there, we see some results, and then I can start working on another project. And working at that large agency, all of a sudden, we might have a project that goes 12, 18 months, and then
Mhm.
maybe it gets launched. All of a sudden, like this organization changes and they don't even publish this project we've been working on. And it can just feel like, you know, that type of timeline, I felt like I wasn't getting that satisfaction of seeing something I built and put my hands on, actually get out there and see some results and have the clients be like, this is awesome. We're getting all this great, that's kind of like what gets me to, excited about coming to work every day.
Absolutely. And I mean, like you said, 12 to 18 months is a long like time frame. So by the end of that, you're probably like, I'm just ready to like be done with this and move on to the next thing.
Right. I know everything I know about this one thing, and I'm over it. Yeah.
Totally. And living on Cape and of course working on Cape too, I'm curious to hear what you would recommend to any business owner who also might live on Cape or on the islands in terms of like things that they should keep in mind with their marketing. Of course, people who live on Cape or on the islands are very attuned to what goes on seasonally, but for anyone who might be newer in business who totally doesn't understand it yet, I'm curious to hear what your advice would be.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, you know, Massachusetts in general, but I think the Cape, especially in Cape and Islands, um, have like a sense of sort of authenticity. So, I
Mhm.
think having that small approach where it is more personal, it's not like a big corporate idea. There's a lot. I think even in certain, I think on Nantucket they've actually banned like chains, so you can't even have a chain
Yeah, I
there,
think
something
you're
like that. I
right.
think so. I think it's very much like a community oriented. So I think that has to be come through in your marketing.
Mhm.
You have to not only talk the talk but also walk the walk. So I think I used to be really involved with Cape Cod Young Professionals. I was on the executive team there for I think it was about 10 years ago at this point. But I made some awesome connections through there that I still talk with to this day. I recently, as part of the Home Builders, I joined their marketing committee. So I think getting out there and putting the time in some of those organizations, as well as being dedicated, whether that's making donations or volunteering or whatever. I think it's one of the best ways outside of just traditional marketing of like blog content and editorial content and stuff like that to really resonate well, it seems to me, for Cape and Islands.
Yeah, I love that piece, just community about being able to meet other people and be like beacon of support ultimately for them. So that way if they need help or they know someone else who might need help, you're there to guide them through whatever it might be they're looking for.
Yep, yeah, exactly. And to your point, you know everything on the Cape is somewhat seasonal. Some are more impacted that by others. So I
Hmm.
think that's what is can be key to get you through some of those those long winter months when business might be slow in your industry, or when the commute's a little tougher in the summertime. Whatever that looks like, I think having that community and feeling like you're part of having that support group is huge.
Totally. And for anyone who's listening to this episode who's interested in pursuing a business in marketing, like any form of marketing, what advice would you have for them for getting started and being successful?
I think the biggest thing I would say is stay curious. Like, you're probably hearing this too from your clients, but one of the biggest thing it gets is like, okay, Chris, I know you're like a tech guy. Like, what's up with AI? Like, what's going on with AI? How do I? And so, what I said a month ago might be changing from what I'd say next week, because it's changing so quickly between the capabilities and the tools that I've been using and how I use them. And when I first started in web design, there was a program I absolutely loved called Fireworks, which like doesn't exist. And then it was like Adobe Illustrator, and now there's like Figma is the one that I use. And
Yeah.
so, it's easy to get caught up in the specific software tooling, but I think it's important, bigger picture, to understand the context, the principles of marketing, because those won't change. And so,
Hmm.
um, being interested in the tooling is important, and learning those. I know a lot of people like use Canva, and so like those things are always changing. 2 or 3 years, like there's a new software out. But I think if you understand the principles, and then how you can map what your clients needs are to like getting results, and whatever way makes sense for them, is kind of the key. I didn't have like a traditional educational approach. Like, I taught myself pretty much web design, and I've taken a bunch of like online courses and things like that and certifications. But I think everyone's path is a little bit different, and some might be just getting in the industry and getting kind of a junior level job. Some might be like more of a traditional college or degree. But I think the biggest thing is just like staying curious and staying on top of it, because it does change so quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Is that like things that even were around like a year ago or trending, I should say, like a year ago, might be considered like obsolete now. So being able to really dive in and familiarize yourself with anything you can, I think is huge. That's great advice, is to just kind of like get scrappy, it sounds like is what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and realizing that things will change. Like my son's at the age where like he's getting social media and like at that teenager age where some of the lingo and the stuff that they post and the stuff is like totally outside of the style I would be posting my own social media, and understanding that like look and feel trends, everything's changing, so you have to be flexible and be able to evolve.
Totally. And a fun question for you. I'm curious to hear what your responses are living on the Cape, but what are your favorite local businesses to support?
So I live in the Upper Cape, and so it's there's a restaurant, the Lobster Trap. I love. They're down the road from
Mhm.
us. Try to go there as much as I can. Um, there's an organization called Love Live Local, which it's not a business themselves. They have like a kind of a gift shop that they carry other vendors from the Cape, but they're a nonprofit on the Cape, and so they are really focused on like highlighting other businesses on the Cape, kind of smaller independent shops, and helping people shop local, support local businesses. So
Mhm.
they do awesome stuff. They do like a big Love Live Local Fest. I think there's two or three throughout the year where it's like an outdoor kind of vendor fair. They have music and things like that. So that's one of my favorite organizations at Cape, because I think they're so proactive about getting the word out and letting people kind of discover what all the great things that Cape has to offer.
Yes, I love Live Local, especially because they give such good data about how local businesses give back to the community. Like being able to see those numbers is huge and goes to show like how important it is, like no matter what, to be able to support your local businesses.
Absolutely. Yep,
Yeah,
for sure.
awesome. Chris, this has been such a great episode, and I've really enjoyed having you on the show. And now love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online and because they'd like to connect.
Yeah, so my website is hellodative.com. And that's Dative. It's one of the biggest questions again. It's like, how do you pronounce that? um, so that's the best place to find me. And then from there, you can find me on LinkedIn. I think that's in the footer somewhere in my other social media accounts.
Perfect. And I'll include all of those links in the show notes so our listeners can easily click through and connect with you from there. Thank you so much again for coming on this week's show.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. I appreciate it.